in terms of rendering in SketchUp, whether it's the files sent to us or the models we create with our colleagues, friends. Many problems arise and there are many issues. We see that these problems have not been resolved despite the user having used SketchUp for a long time, or that some fundamental things are missing, friends. Therefore, some situations you experience while rendering in SketchUp might be included in this video. If you watch the video until the end, you can really gain some great information. There are fundamentally very important but very simple things, friends. It's beneficial to do them. Firstly, working with groups and components and maintaining discipline by working according to layers until the end of the project. There were many conveniences that came to us, friends. For example, a friend of ours has drawn a facade, a very nice drawing of a 4-story, 5-story building. But you click on the facade, you double-click, the entire facade gets selected. In other words, the distinction between group and component hasn't been made. In a file where the distinction between group and component hasn't been made, friends, it is very, very difficult for us to take an individual render, because it's like V-Ray. Render engines, whether it's V-Ray or RLNC, are render engines that place great importance on group and component work, friends. Render engines? Because in terms of geometry, that is, during the drawing phase, the model has a solid principle. As a principle, SketchUp progresses according to group and component work. How can you tell if a person, a user, a modeler, or a designer knows SketchUp? If they are using groups and components, it means they truly understand SketchUp. If they are not delving much into the group and component aspect and are not dividing large parts with layers, then they are actually missing some important criteria. Basically, they are not fulfilling some fundamental criteria that need to be met. And this is an indication that they will face really big problems in the future. Most of the problems experienced in both Lumion and individually are these. Character, my friends. Another issue is the insertion of all models found in the 3D warehouse into the scene, my friends. I saw this a few years ago, so maybe there are still examples of it. A friend of ours is designing an office. There is 3D. He filled it with all the accessories he found, my friends. Imagine an office. Think of a desk. There are many accessories on the desk. All the accessories are on the desk. So he added whatever he found. And the render doesn't start. The render won't start. Because when you add a model that doesn't belong to you, especially for V-Ray render, I'm talking about, you will encounter problems. Because V-Ray render reads the coating and polygon layout on the model in a physical reading. If there is an error in a model, it won't continue the render. In fact, when you look at render errors, you will see that there are many coding and texture errors. I'm talking about V-Ray render. There is a process of stabilizing, making feasible, and optimizing the file. In SketchUp, if you don't check the group and component logic and the files you have downloaded when you draw the file, you will encounter many problems. And the third situation where you might encounter problems. Friends, calling in many models that you will draw. That is, the models you will create yourself from outside. The model of calling from outside is actually valid for models you cannot find. In other words, you can download models in organic forms that you cannot find externally as ready-made, but you should carry them yourself up to the modeling stage. This is necessary, friends. One of the principles of rendering in SketchUp is also this. Because if you don't create the majority of the model yourself, you will face significant problems in your scene when you overlook the model errors of the external person and use those models. Friends. And fourthly, the use of high-resolution textures throughout the scene. Now, I will give an example. You downloaded a texture, friends. The texture is about 10 megabytes, meaning I'm talking about a high-quality texture. When you use 30 of these, it amounts to 300 megabytes. And if your SketchUp model is already 300 megabytes, adding 300 megabytes of texture makes it 600 megabytes. You can't even move in that scene. That's why when you use high-quality textures, you need to know where and how to use these textures. Friends, there are many videos about this on our site, that is, on our YouTube channel. Regular viewers already know very well how these should be used. Friends, so there's also the topic of the render engine. Okay, you've solved all of these. What do you need to get? You need to render. To what extent do you need to use the render engine? You know, SketchUp's render engines work more effectively and faster compared to 3D, MX, and Render, and they have more features. While 3D Max users cannot get a 360-degree render, cannot explore a place with goggles, or have very short animations. While they cannot get 30 seconds or 10 seconds in a short time, SketchUp users can render very quickly in 10 seconds. They can get an animation in 10 seconds. They can get a 360-degree render in 10 seconds. and send it to the client via a browser. We have such an advantage. To utilize these advantages, our scene needs to be prepared very well, according to the points I mentioned, friends. So our scene needs to be prepared like a book. In other words, when you look at the scene, even without rendering, it should really look like a render. So, before moving on to rendering, before switching to Enscape, TV Motion, D5, and other rendering engines, make sure that the scene is perfectly prepared and that color harmonies and other aspects are adhered to, friends. There's also the issue of the graphics card. Actually, the topic of rendering in SketchUp. Even though the scene, the level of polygons, and SketchUp's own basic principles are reflected, you eventually end up dealing with the graphics card part. Friends, because these are interconnected, I want to mention this as well. Generally, friends, many of our friends opt for AMD because AMD graphics cards are cheaper when comparing graphics cards. Friends, there's a situation here. AMD graphics cards currently do not support the render engines you use in the market. It's only valid for VRI. When you use render engines, like Enscape, D5, TV, Motion, and when you use render engines like our engine, these utilize what we call RTX, ray tracing technology. These are only available on the graphics cards used by NVIDIA. If you go and buy a cheap AMD card, you'll only be able to play games, and that's all you'll do. But here, you need to choose a graphics card. It should be NVIDIA RTX. Friends, it should be at least a 3060, 3070, 4060, or 4070 graphics card. When it comes to taking renders in SketchUp, it's actually the last point. The efficiency of the graphics card, friends. Even though we talk about the efficiency of the model, texture, and scene from the beginning, the ultimate point where it all leads to, friends, the point where the graphics card is, it's a very important point. This too. When buying a laptop or choosing a new one, you need to know which render engine works with what efficiency in SketchUp. Therefore, if you use RTX graphics cards, you can render at very random moments. Which render engine should I start with? If you ask this question, friends, I would most easily recommend SKB to you. It continues with TV Motion, D5, and other render engines. TV Motion is free. D5 render is free. You can use it for free. Also, friends who have opened an office already, if they choose D5 or TV Motion, they can learn it very comfortably, both in terms of budget and progress. There are already many videos on TV Motion and D5 on our YouTube channel. It's also available in Enscape. Enscape is paid. I think it costs around 35 euros per month, friends. The purpose of using Enscape is a bit more practical, a bit faster. But correct models, correct lighting, and correct. When materials are used, it is a render that is truly comparable to Corona Render. I would like to say that it has an engine. Remember this, friends. 25% belongs to the render engine, 75% of the skill belongs to the user themselves. If you can't get realistic renders, don't blame the render engine. The issue is somewhat with yourself. Look at the time you have spent on the render engine. There is an error in the timing. There is definitely an error in the timing, because in our conversations and discussions with users over the past 15 years, we have seen that the time allocated by users is really very little. I can give a very good example of this. The most recent example we experienced, I asked a friend, "How many hours per week do you work?" I asked. He said 2 hours. I couldn't make sense of it. Could it be 2 hours daily? I asked. He said no, 2 hours weekly. Friends, 2 hours weekly is not enough for a render engine. You need to work at least 4 hours daily for at least 6 months, at least 4 hours. You need to work so that over 6 months, the progress and development process of that render engine becomes clear to you, and it gives you an output. I mean, only at that level. This is a profession, friends. It is a profession that requires effort. Finally, I will talk a bit about artificial intelligence, taking up very little of your time, friends. Artificial intelligence, friends, is not very beneficial to someone who knows nothing. Artificial intelligence is beneficial for people with certain experience and expertise who use rendering engines and drawing engines in terms of usability. You provide artificial intelligence and visual data to enhance the effect on that visual. You need to input a prompt or reflect your knowledge about the work so that something can emerge. In other words, artificial intelligence won't be very beneficial to a friend or a designer who is not at all involved in this work. Friends, I see that 75% of those watching our channel are not subscribed to our channel, Friends. If you subscribe, you would make us very happy. With useful videos like this, we will help enhance your vision and enable you to do better work. Friends, see you again soon. With love and respect, goodbye.